Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded sovereign land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and recognise their ongoing connection to the land and waterways. I'm Caitlin Sanderford, a classroom music teacher in Western Sydney and a PhD candidate and casual academic at the University of Sydney.
I'm Brad Fuller, an Associate Lecturer in Music Education at the University of Sydney and Classroom Music Teacher at St Augustine's College, Sydney.
And I'm James Humberstone. I'm an Associate Professor in Music Education, also at the University of Sydney. Back in a pre-pandemic world, Brad started working on a PhD on flipped learning in music education with me. But it was the pedagogical approaches at his school that were instead flipped by a new principal who brought with him the local government's new batch of evidence-based practice recommendations called What Works Best. Brad's student-centred learn through music in classroom that you can see in this video was suddenly told that it should use explicit teaching and that he should have high expectations.
So I flipped my PhD and my career and turned a critical lens to this, quote, evidence-based practice, which I came to call neoliberal evidence-based practice, finding that I was able to draw on international research and methods to show that, quote, what works best wasn't necessarily best for music education.
Brad's investigation revealed that evidence-based practice in education has been a highly contested field for 25 years, during which time the directive of telling teachers what works has persisted across government, media and favoured research.
Since the late 1990s, this debate has been largely centred on epistemology. Notably, David Hargraves argued for abandoning theories rooted in psychology, sociology, philosophy and history in favour of evidence including what works. Roger Slavin extended this idea, advocating for randomised controlled trials as the standard for credible evidence. Conversely, numerous researchers contended that such a positivist approach, relying solely on quantitative methods, could not capture the complex nature of teaching and learning. Another key issue for both camps has been defining what constitutes evidence in education.
But while Brad completed the fourth paper of his PhD and began the hard work of turning them into a thesis with a coherent message, the neoliberal juggernaut rolled on. Since then, every teacher in our state, including every music teacher in every government school, has been forced to spend several days learning how to carry out the mandated processes for explicit teaching in our classrooms.
And the popular press continues to present government policy and its evidence-based foundations as if that evidence base has been independently written or peer-reviewed, which it hasn't. The old tropes and dichotomies of scientifically approved explicit teaching versus hippie student-centeredness are endlessly rolled out, with Dewey and Freire seemingly destined to eternally roll in their respective graves.
A new music syllabus was published and we watched decades of progressiveness pushed back by a requirement to make it fit to the same template and nomenclature of the more important maths and English syllabi, with a series of 113 content points to be taught, replacing the much more open musical choices that faced music teachers for the last 3 decades.
We started to look for a way forward that could help music teachers in this mess. As I worked on the final section of my PhD, I looked to the research on EEBP in other fields and realised that perhaps we could do it better in music education by rejecting the neoliberal model through an educative subversion of it. My investigation into evidence-based practice in medicine revealed significant contrasts with its neoliberalised application in education. In medicine, EEBP involves more than conducting randomised control trials or literature reviews. Doctors must also consider patient values, needs and circumstances, their clinical expertise and the context. I theorised that if we replace the medical practitioner with the teacher and the patient with the student, Hoffman et al.'s assertions about EEBP in medicine might also hold for music education. Here is Hoffman et al.'s quotation recontextualised. Evidence-based practice is not just about using research evidence, but also about valuing and using the education, skills and experiences that you have as a teacher. Furthermore, it is also about considering each student's situation and values when making decisions, as well as considering characteristics of the classroom context. For example, the resources available in which you are interacting with each student. This requires judgment and artistry as well as science and logic.
Hoffman et al. Call this process clinical reasoning. Brad theorized pedagogical reasoning, which should be driven by the overarching goal of the music teacher to design educative teaching learning experiences with and for their students. Educative experiences put, quote, the care, growth, and positive transformation of students as persons at the center of every music teaching learning situation.
We published a paper on the new Educative Evidence-Based Practice theoretical model and then planned a symposium. We launched it at the ISME Global Summit in Helsinki last July and asked scholars and teachers to come together to A. empirically test the model with new research, B. test it in their music teaching practice, and C. critique it philosophically and theoretically. The symposium ran on the 30th of September and the 1st of October 2024 in time zones around the world over Zoom. With a small internal grant, research student and music teacher Caitlin joined the team as research assistant, with Peter Orenstein as our in-house techie, and I hired a hotel suite so that we could stay online for 26 hours, nipping out for a nap or a shower if we so wished.
We started each time zone session by giving a longer explanation of the model and then using provocations by scholars in the field, including John Hattie, who had engaged with us enthusiastically over email.
After each opening definitions and provocations, we started with an open discussion to help participants cement their own definitions of EEBP.
Then we invited speakers on those three themes, research, practice and philosophy, and as you can see, we had a wonderful itinerary. And as you might expect, through the wide-ranging papers and arising discussions, the EEBP model itself began to be dialogically strengthened and transformed.
Caitlin and I kept notes of things that needed to be followed up in presentations and discussed further, and we used an AI meeting summary tool, Fathom AI, which transcribed every word and created its own list of topics covered. We then combined these notes to create a report at the end of the symposium and also shared them with all delegates in time for a final discussion session via a Padlet. In reporting the overarching ideas and themes that emerged from the presentations and discussions in the symposium, the ones we presented in this Padlet, we focus on this as a dialogic process that shaped the next steps and future research designs to develop this theory.
These emerging themes present possibilities for deepening the theoretical foundations and potential applications of the theory across varied educational and cultural contexts. The conversations from the symposium are not data in the traditional sense and have not been analysed as such. Instead, we present ideas and arguments from our notes, sharing the overarching ideas and directions as they were presented in the final session of the symposium, and possible updates to the model. We then invite further dialogic engagement and critical examination as we seek to develop the model through research and practice.
We began by examining the names and relationships of the circles in the theoretical model, asking questions such as, what is the context? Are the circles within a larger circle? How do we balance them, and do some circles hold more weight at times? How should we address the in-between spaces? Some participants proposed rebalancing the teacher expertise circle to better reflect student input and contextual diversity. Should teachers' and students' considerations align more closely? Should the student circle include expertise and the teacher's circle values, needs and circumstances for balance? In the final session, we refined the EEBP model, exploring ways to integrate diverse epistemologies and ontologies. There was a strong emphasis on decentering Eurocentric perspectives and embedding First Nations knowledges meaningfully within the framework.
Our teachers told us that none of the circles are useful if you don't, at least try to, have positive relationships with students. Relationships can, however, be negative. A significant portion of discussions in the second session, particularly among Australian and New Zealand participants, focused on relationships with Indigenous students and knowledges and the resulting cultural safety or lack thereof. There was a strong advocacy for the need to foster meaningful relationships between non-Indigenous teachers, their local communities and students, and for teachers to explore relationships through First Nations lenses. Cultural safety and relational pedagogy were proposed as crucial factors in developing meaningful and responsive teaching practices, which also came out as its own theme. There was a call for teachers to reflect on their biases, develop their understanding of First Nations knowledges, and adopt strengths-based approaches that incorporate First Nations ways of knowing in order to create culturally safer spaces. In some instances, this means musicking safe spaces, free of judgment, accessible for everyone.
Our discussion extended to defining evidence, recognizing the need to move beyond the Eurocentric perspectives. Given the context of EEBP for music education, we explored ways to centre story and song, drawing insights from First Nations traditions. An experienced teacher and curriculum writer prompted us to consider how will definitions of evidence differ from frameworks like arose standards of evidence. This raised further questions. What is the role of evidence? What counts as evidence? Should we broaden or even redefine evidence? A recurring theme was the challenge teachers, especially newer ones, face with the what works best policy mentality, which often oversimplifies classroom realities. This is particularly problematic in music education, where creativity and contextual teaching are essential. Teachers noted issues like limited resources, time pressures, and rigid policy structures that hinder meaningful change.
Many teachers asked us, how do we get easy access to research? Participants identified the value of partnerships between teachers and researchers in bridging the theory-practice divide. Collaborative efforts to generate case studies, practitioner-oriented resources, and teacher-researcher communities of practice were seen as essential for ensuring the relevance and applicability of EEBP in diverse educational settings.
For teachers in Florida and young teachers working in conservative schools, it was suggested that younger teachers could work with more experienced teachers, bring them along. We agreed that we need to recognise role tension, role conflict, and role extension. Teachers and pre-service teachers told us of the need to focus on the keen beans and let them lead, to recognise and be ready for the small number of teachers who are not keen for change and can torpedo the change and implementation programme.
We also received a few criticisms at the symposium. The first was that the topics covered at the symposium and in our research so far were too focused on secondary and tertiary education. We agree. If we're going to extend this project, we need to think about how it applies to those teaching young children, including non-specialist or generalist primary or elementary classroom teachers.
And for the second criticism, or in fact whole paper of criticisms, we also had Steen Nepper-Larsen, who told us that the whole EBP mechanism is broken and that one extra E won't help.
You adopt a language and adapt to a machine, and I really don't like that. And I wonder if that's the wisest we can do in 2024, to accept the rules of the game and to be little tiny reformists. I don't like that. I argue that we have to be more ambitious and be kind of fundamental, critical people asking questions to this way the educational system has transformed itself to a failure. We have to be on the side with curious students, devoted teachers, being governed and teased, forced and doomed, not in a way to dance like the system wants us to do, but we should be more knowing and reflecting upon what we are doing. So don't be a part of the play. Escape while time still is there to escape. Don't just add an E, smash the whole machine.
Apart from Steen, both teachers and researchers were most interested to move toward writing a book about using EEBP in music education, just as we'd hoped. In fact, we've even spoken to Steen since, and he's keen to keep the debate going, even as a chapter in our book. Do we fight from within the system or refuse to play the game at all?
However, teachers urged us not just to write another research book, but to create resources, actionable lesson plans, and activities for young people and children that aligned with the model, and in individual cases, the research evidence. We talked about options for a separate teacher book or for an accompanying website, and the pros and cons of getting an established publisher to work with us versus an open publisher to make it free for teachers. Many of the teachers who attended the symposium intend to write for the book, share ideas for the book, or partner with researchers to co-author. So James, Brad, Dr. Emily Wilson from the University of Melbourne and I intend to work as editors of a collected edition.
One of our discussions at the symposium and in our editorial meetings since has been the incorporation of pedagogical reasoning into the visual four circles model, which I'm sharing a mock-up of here. The other issue that came out so clearly was the importance of the framework including or always being aware of diverse cultural perspectives and knowledge systems in order to create safe learning spaces for everyone. One of the ways that we thought of showing this was as a filter through which ideas are run as we apply the model, but it is perhaps a blunt visual metaphor. It's something for more work.
One challenge that remains unresolved is how to support teachers in adopting EEBP in their practice while managing existing workloads and navigating institutional resistance. The symposium highlighted the need for policy know-how among teachers, helping them work subversively within conservative or restrictive educational environments.
We have just submitted a Spencer Education grant with a few key research teams of academics working alongside teachers or community music providers as examples or pilot studies to further develop the theory. While we will be testing out the theory in a wide range of contexts across the continents, in Australia, the US and Europe, the 4 pilot studies come together to examine the EEBP framework in a way that seeks to help practitioners to design culturally responsive music education practices for diverse participants who may have historically been marginalised.
If successful, we'll travel to key conferences from early 2026, not just to present updates on how the book and resources are coming along, but to make trips to visit authors and talk about their work and disseminate it to other authors, so we continue to bring the model along as we did at the symposium. This is intended to allow us to work together in the process of writing the book, rather than having that structure that often affects academic collected editions where a call for chapter goes out and then 2 years later the editors try to wrangle what comes in into some kind of coherent picture.
Regardless of the grant outcome, we hope to incorporate this dialogic process into the development of the theory and throughout the creation of the academic book and teacher resources, just as we're doing in this paper today.
We will be calling for chapters and teaching projects to contribute to the book and resources very soon. If you would like to keep up to date, use the QR code on the screen to share your details with us. Our website also contains a sample chapter and more information about the project. We hope that some of you are thinking of ways of using the EEBP model in your research as we speak. And in the spirit of continuing this dialogic process, we would like to invite thoughts, questions, ideas, and critiques from your perspectives and contexts.